A single decision in the depths of winter has triggered the most catastrophic logistical collapse in modern military history. 500,000 Russian soldiers are now cut off from their lifelines, stranded without ammunition, fuel, or food. The mighty Russian war machine that once threatened to steamroll across continents has ground to a halt in the frozen wastelands of eastern Ukraine. Today, we reveal how Putin's gamble has backfired spectacularly, leaving his forces isolated and desperate. Welcome back to Mr. Warlog. What I'm about to show you isn't just another battlefield update. This is the moment when the tide of war shifted forever, when supply lines that stretched across thousands of kilometers suddenly snapped like frozen cables. The numbers are staggering. Intelligence reports confirm that 500,000 Russian personnel are now operating in zones where regular resupply has become impossible. But this isn't an accident. This is the result of a calculated strategy that Putin never saw coming. You need to understand the geography to grasp the magnitude of this disaster. Russia's military doctrine has always relied on overwhelming logistics, massive convoys, endless rail networks, and supply depots that could feed an army for months. But Ukraine has systematically targeted every single critical junction, every bridge, every fuel depot that keeps Putin's war machine alive. The result is a logistical nightmare that would make Napoleon's retreat from Moscow look like a casual weekend trip. Let's start with the Dnipro River crossing disaster that began this cascade of failures. For months, Russian engineers worked around the clock to establish pontoon bridges and temporary crossings. These weren't just military installations. They were the arteries pumping life into Putin's eastern offensive. Ukrainian intelligence watched. They waited. They planned. Then, in a coordinated strike that lasted just 48 hours, every major crossing point was obliterated. The precision was surgical. Long-range artillery systems, guided by real-time satellite intelligence, turned these vital supply routes into twisted metal graveyards. But destroying the bridges was only the beginning. What followed was a campaign of systematic strangulation that has left entire Russian divisions gasping for resources. Picture this scenario. You're a Russian commander responsible for feeding, fueling, and arming 20,000 soldiers. Yesterday, your supply convoy was scheduled to arrive with ammunition, medical supplies, and winter gear. But that convoy is now burning wreckage scattered across a frozen riverbank. Your fuel reserves are down to 3 days. Your artillery shells are nearly exhausted. Your soldiers are asking questions you can't answer. This is the reality facing hundreds of Russian field commanders right now. The domino effect started with transportation networks and has cascaded into every aspect of military operations. When trucks can't reach the front lines, ammunition stockpiles dwindle. When fuel tankers are destroyed, armored vehicles become expensive metal sculptures. When medical supplies are cut off, wounded soldiers face impossible choices. The statistics paint a devastating picture. According to intercepted communications, Russian ammunition consumption has dropped by 70% in the past month, not because they're conserving resources strategically, but because they simply don't have shells to fire. Artillery units that once unleashed barrages lasting hours now ration their remaining rounds like precious gemstones. But ammunition shortages are just the tip of the iceberg. Food distribution has collapsed across multiple sectors of the front. Soldiers are reporting meals reduced to single portions of bread and canned meat that expired years ago. In some positions, troops are surviving on melted snow and whatever they can forage from abandoned villages. This isn't just hunger. This is systematic malnutrition weakening an entire army. The fuel crisis is equally catastrophic. Tank crews are abandoning perfectly functional vehicles simply because there's no diesel to power them. Entire mechanized brigades have been forced to operate as infantry units. Supply helicopters that once delivered critical resources now sit grounded on improvised airfields, their fuel tanks empty, and their crews waiting for deliveries that never come. Winter weather has amplified every logistical problem exponentially. Temperatures that plunge below -20 degrees Celsius have turned routine maintenance into survival challenges. Vehicle engines freeze overnight. Weapons jam from ice buildup. Soldiers suffer frostbite while performing basic duties. The Russian military machine, built for rapid advances in favorable conditions, is now trapped in an environment where every day brings new mechanical failures and human suffering. Communication networks have deteriorated alongside physical supply lines. When relay stations lose power and spare parts become unavailable, entire units lose contact with their command structure. Field reports describe radio silence lasting days or even weeks. Commanders are making critical decisions based on outdated information, while their superiors hundreds of kilometers away remain completely unaware of ground conditions. The psychological impact cannot be understated. Russian soldiers who joined this conflict expecting swift victory now find themselves in a grinding war of attrition, where basic necessities have become luxury items. Morale reports intercepted by Ukrainian intelligence reveal widespread discussions of desertion, surrender, and outright rebellion against orders. When survival becomes more important than military objectives, discipline begins to crumble. Medical evacuation has become nearly impossible in many sectors. Wounded soldiers who might have survived with prompt treatment are dying from preventable complications. Field hospitals lack basic supplies like antibiotics, painkillers, and surgical equipment. Medical personnel are performing amputations without anesthesia and treating infected wounds with improvised remedies. The human cost of this logistical collapse extends far beyond battlefield casualties. Putin's response to this crisis reveals the depths of his desperation. Emergency supply operations using civilian aircraft and commercial trucking companies have been attempted repeatedly. But these improvised solutions face the same targeting that destroyed the original infrastructure. Ukrainian forces have demonstrated their ability to track and eliminate any vehicle attempting to reach stranded Russian positions. The strategic implications are profound. An army without supplies cannot maintain offensive operations. Units that should be advancing are instead focused entirely on basic survival. Territory that Russia claimed to control has become a burden rather than an asset, as every occupied position requires resources that no longer exist. Intelligence sources confirm that emergency meetings in Moscow have devolved into finger-pointing sessions where military leaders blame each other for the logistical catastrophe. Putin's inner circle is fracturing as the reality of their situation becomes impossible to ignore. The war machine that was supposed to demonstrate Russian power to the world has instead exposed fundamental weaknesses in their military doctrine. This collapse didn't happen overnight. It's the result of months of careful planning and execution by Ukrainian forces, who understood that defeating a larger army required attacking its weaknesses rather than confronting its strengths. By targeting supply lines instead of engaging in direct confrontation, Ukraine has achieved what many thought impossible. The ripple effects extend far beyond the immediate battlefield. Russian defense contractors who built careers on military logistics are facing investigations and arrests. Regional governors responsible for supporting military operations are being replaced or demoted. The entire structure that supported Putin's war effort is cracking under the pressure of repeated failures. But the most significant consequence may be the loss of military credibility that Putin spent decades building. The Russian military that once paraded through Red Square with precision and power now resembles a broken convoy scattered across frozen highways. International observers who spent years analyzing Russian capabilities are rewriting their assessments. The bear that roared across multiple continents has been reduced to a wounded animal limping through snow-covered trenches. What makes this collapse even more devastating is the timing. Putin chose to launch major offensive operations just as winter reached its harshest point. Military planners who should have anticipated seasonal challenges instead found themselves managing a crisis that compounds with every passing day. Supply routes that barely functioned in autumn have become completely impassable as temperatures continue dropping. The human drama unfolding in these isolated positions defies imagination. Soldiers who enlisted expecting modern warfare now huddle around improvised fires, burning furniture and debris. Equipment designed to operate in controlled environments fails repeatedly in conditions that push every system beyond its limits. Personal accounts smuggled out through encrypted channels describe scenes that belong in historical documentaries rather than contemporary conflicts. Russian mothers who sent their sons to fight are receiving letters describing conditions that sound like punishment rather than military service. These communications, when they arrive at all, paint pictures of desperation that contradict every official statement from Moscow. Families are learning the truth about this war not from government briefings, but from desperate pleas hidden in censored correspondence. The economic implications cascade through every level of Russian society. Resources that should support civilian infrastructure are being diverted to emergency military operations that achieve nothing but temporary delays. Fuel that could heat homes is burned in futile attempts to reach stranded units. Medical supplies needed in Russian hospitals disappear into logistical black holes where they help no one. Putin's propaganda machine struggles to explain why victory announcements have been replaced by emergency mobilization orders. State television that once broadcast confident predictions now focuses on abstract threats and historical grievances. The narrative of inevitable triumph has been quietly abandoned in favor of survival rhetoric that prepares the population for prolonged suffering. Field commanders who once competed for prestigious assignments now avoid responsibility for sectors where failure seems guaranteed. Military careers that took decades to build are ending in disgrace as officers face impossible choices between following orders and preserving their remaining forces. The command structure that held the Russian military together is fragmenting under pressures it was never designed to handle. Ukraine's strategy has evolved beyond simple battlefield tactics into comprehensive warfare that targets every system supporting Russian operations. Engineers who designed these attacks understood that modern armies depend on complex networks that become vulnerable when critical nodes are eliminated. By identifying and destroying these pressure points, Ukrainian forces have achieved effects far exceeding their numerical disadvantages. The technological disparity becomes more apparent each day. Western intelligence systems provide Ukrainian commanders with real-time information about Russian movements, while Putin's forces operate with outdated maps and compromised communication networks. This information advantage translates into devastating effectiveness when targeting supply convoys and support infrastructure. International military analysts are studying this conflict as a textbook example of asymmetric warfare principles. Smaller forces using superior intelligence and precision targeting have neutralized advantages that seemed insurmountable just months ago. Defense colleges around the world are already incorporating these lessons into curricula that will influence military thinking for generations. Russian soldiers trapped in these positions face choices that no military training prepared them for. Surrender means capture and uncertain treatment. Retreat means abandoning equipment and positions that cost enormous resources to establish. Remaining in place means enduring conditions that grow worse each day. Every option carries consequences that extend far beyond individual survival. The international community watches this unfolding disaster with a mixture of fascination and horror. Nations that feared Russian military power are reassessing threats that seemed overwhelming just months ago. Alliance structures built to counter Russian aggression are discovering that their preparations may have been based on outdated assumptions about enemy capabilities. Moscow's attempts to project strength become more desperate as reality contradicts official statements. Military parades and weapons demonstrations cannot hide the fact that hundreds of thousands of soldiers face conditions that would challenge any army in history. The gap between propaganda and battlefield reality grows wider each day. Supply chain failures that began with transportation networks now affect every aspect of military operations. Manufacturing facilities that produced equipment for this conflict face shortages of raw materials and skilled workers. The industrial base supporting Putin's war effort shows signs of strain that suggest deeper systemic problems. Regional commanders who once enjoyed autonomy now receive contradictory orders from Moscow officials who lack current information about ground conditions. Decision-making processes that should adapt to changing circumstances instead create confusion that multiplies existing problems. The centralized command structure that Putin favors has become a liability when rapid responses are essential. Weather forecasts that predict continued harsh conditions suggest this crisis will intensify rather than resolve naturally. Military equipment designed for different environments faces challenges that no amount of maintenance can overcome. Soldiers trained for conventional warfare must adapt to survival situations that test human endurance rather than tactical skills. The strategic miscalculation that created this situation represents one of the most significant military blunders in recent history. Putin's advisors, who promised quick victories and manageable costs, now face consequences that threaten the stability of the entire Russian state. This isn't just a military defeat. This is a systemic failure that exposes fundamental flaws in Russian decision-making processes. As we prepare to examine the final implications of this logistical catastrophe, one question emerges above all others. What we're witnessing isn't just a military failure. This is the moment when Putin's illusion of invincibility shattered against the reality of modern warfare. 500,000 soldiers stranded without supplies, supply lines severed. An empire's military machine reduced to scrap metal scattered across frozen battlefields. Ukraine has proven that precision beats power, strategy defeats size, and intelligence trumps intimidation. The ripple effects of this collapse will echo through Moscow's corridors for years to come. Putin's war machine that once threatened continents now can't even feed its own troops. The bear that roared has been reduced to a whimper in the winter wind. This isn't just Ukraine's victory. This is a masterclass in how smaller forces can defeat seemingly insurmountable odds through superior planning and execution. History will remember this as the winter when logistics became destiny, when supply lines became lifelines, when Putin's greatest gamble became his most devastating loss.